Do you have a ton of tulips that are poking through the ground and ready to bloom at any moment, but you don't have a sales outlet or a plan to move all of those tulips? Well, then this video is for you because we are going to talk about 2 ways to move a lot of tulips at once, and then we're going to talk about numbers. So I am entering into my 4th year of flower farming here in New Jersey in Zone 7A. And even though I haven't been flower farming for a long time and I flower farm on a relatively small scale, tulips are actually my biggest crop by multiples. At this point, I've grown, I would say, around 15,000 tulips without even including year 1. And so I've had a lot of time and focus on looking at how to make the numbers work. So I'm going to share all of that in today's video. We're going to talk about what's the lowest I can go per stem in order to still be profitable. What are the various costs that I've looked at? How have I reduced the costs on the labor side? I've done so many things related to experiments, trying to drive down that piece of the equation because that has always been such a high number for myself and other fellow flower farmers that I wanted to see if I can make tulips profitable. And I can tell you that they can indeed be a profitable crop for all of us. So now let's start with the first idea, which is hosting a bouquet bar or a pop-up. And I've done this before with mixed flowers, but also solely with tulips. One of the things that I didn't realize about tulips is how loved they are by people. Tulips are actually one of the most popular flowers around the world, not just in the United States. And so people go nuts for tulips. So if you only had one type of flower, don't think that you're limited because people are not necessarily expecting mixed bunches. After all, if you go to the grocery store or any other store that sells commercially grown tulips, you'll notice that most of them actually come in a straight bunch. So let's talk about why a pop-up. What are the benefits? Well, the first is that it's a great way to move a lot of stems at once, especially within a given period of time, meaning you're going to be on a certain location for a duration, and that duration is defined, which is nice because the second idea I'm going to offer does not have that confined duration. The second positive is you get to meet a lot of new customers, but more importantly, you have an opportunity to capture their contact information in the form of an email address or even a phone number. In both of the bouquet bars that I did, customers were so excited that they were practically giving me their contact information. And they were always asking for business cards, so make sure you have something to give to them if you do a bouquet bar. The third is that it actually doesn't take a ton of time to operationalize, meaning once you've picked a partner who you want to work with, you can do this within a few days' notice. Now, obviously, the more notice you give to that local business, the better it is for everyone because you also have a little bit more time to do marketing. But fundamentally speaking, for a crop like tulips, sometimes it's hard to tell when they're going to come in. Sometimes they come in a little bit earlier because the weather has shifted and it's gotten really, really warm. My plan for that would be to contact a business and say, hey, I've got all these tulips coming in. They should be coming in either 2 weekends from now or 3 weekends from now. I'm not exactly sure. I can give you a more firm timeline at the end of the week, but would you be interested in partnering with me in a tulip bar? And then you can tease up, hey, coming soon to this coffee shop, a tulip bar. Stay tuned for details, right? So what I'm trying to say is that you can make it flexible for you, especially if you don't know the timing. The first question I get from people when I suggest, have you thought of a pop-up or bouquet bar, is how do I go about having this conversation? What does it look like? So I had actually done 2 videos related to bouquet bars, and I am going to show you a clip from the first one that I hosted, which was a tulip bouquet bar, and this is what the conversation sounded like with the shop owner. The owner happens to love tulips. She's bought tulips from me. In fact, she was coming to pick up tulips to give to a mother-in-law when I asked her, hey, would you like to partner with me for a Valentine's Day event? And she was like, yeah. So we had a conversation over email. She did inquire, hey, what is the setup like? Does the consignment shop get anything financially? And my answer was my primary objective is to get more customers into the door for you. I want this to be a really good Saturday
morning for you two where it's mutually beneficial. You have the space to host me, but my goal is to also drive traffic that would otherwise not come in at that time for you. So she understood the mutual benefit of having me there and was like, yes, absolutely, let's do it. So that's how I found a business to partner with. I really think you could partner with anyone, assuming that they are in a reasonable location and that they have a place for you to set up. And it was really nice because they actually had a little area with a table already, so I didn't even have to bring a table.
I just want to emphasize that I have never given a share of revenue to the partners who I work with, and I see that most other flower farmers don't either. But look, every situation is different. You might be working with a local business that has a crazy amount of traffic, that you're not necessarily adding a lot of traffic to them. Most of these businesses that would partner with you actually want to support a small business like a flower farm, but in a case where they are still seeking something financial as compensation, I would actually consider giving them a cut, maybe like 10% of whatever I'm making. So I think it's really situation dependent and on you as to how you want to structure the deal, but know that many of us can get away with zero financial compensation for that local business partner. The second question that I often get asked is, well, how do you start marketing this event? So this is pretty straightforward because this is a partnership. So that means that you, as well as the local business, should be doing marketing. And when I say marketing, I mean both of you should be posting to your social media outlets as well as an email list if you have one. The local shop that I work with had a really good email list, so that was her primary way of marketing. And of course, she posts on her Facebook and on her Instagram accounts, but her email list was really where it was at for the promotion. She also posted it on a downtown bulletin board. And for myself, I actually not only posted on my social media outlets, but I also took out Facebook ads. And so I want to run a little snippet of what I talked about with Facebook ads because I do think that they could add value without needing a ton of extra knowledge or learning as to how to run them. So here's a snippet from the video about this.
You can also boost an event. So when you boost an event, there is a button that says interested. And when someone clicks on that button, then obviously you know whether or not they are interested in going or not. Now, out of every 100 people who say they're interested, probably about 15 to 20% actually show up. So we had a total of 61 people who were interested in the event. And ultimately we had 17 people show up. And some of them did indeed come from that Facebook ad. So that Facebook ad, to me, did make sense in terms of spending that money, because for me it was just like I just have to sell an extra 3 bouquets and that felt like a no-brainer. And also it got a lot more local followers onto my page, so there was a bit of brand recognition there. But the shop owner also really appreciated that I spent that marketing money to boost the event and to get some more excitement.
Now, you might also be wondering what kind of tulips sell at a tulip bouquet bar. And this for me has always just been really mind-blowing and eye-opening because the tulips that I would expect to sell well don't necessarily always sell well. And the typical mantra is true. People like color, people like brightness, boldness. But here's a snippet from the last tulip bouquet bar that I did and the findings from that in terms of popularity of tulips.
Believe it or not, I said earlier that I was very curious to see how those double-headed peony style yellow tulips would do. That one was called Yellow Margarita. That was the most popular tulip. Literally only 3 people out of the 17 did not choose Yellow Margarita in their bouquets. Everyone else chose at least one stem. There were plenty of bouquets where it was predominantly yellow. People literally gravitated towards that bucket. And so when I posted on my Instagram stories, one of the designers who I sell to was like, I just still can't wrap my head around this. So it just goes to tell you that retail customers are so different than design customers because people want bright colors. And I think that when people saw that big bloom head in person, they were really excited and they could see that it was going to be a super, super showy tulip. So Yellow Margarita was definitely at the top of the list. And then I would say that Purple Crystal, which was this fringe purple tulip, was a close second. second. But overall, all of the tulips did really well, except for White Valley Exotic Emperor. I would say only 2 people put that into their bouquets. Part of it was that I think that they were a little bit shorter. They were a little bit more blown out, but people all were just surprised that that was even a tulip. So it got a lot of compliments, just not a lot of buys.
The partner who I worked with was absolutely awesome. She is a lovely person. The one drawback about working with this business is that it is in a location where there are no windows and it's just a little bit more dark inside. So obviously it's a lot of artificial light. If you want to see what good looks like and have inspiration, I highly recommend you check out Little Farmhouse Flowers Instagram feed, because they recently did a tulip pop-up and it was amazing. I mean, this is like eye candy at its best. Now, Little Farmhouse Flowers forces thousands of tulips hydroponically, so they have many varieties and many colors, which allows them to create this spectacle of beauty. But I want to emphasize that even if you don't have a ton of varieties, even if you only have like 3 or 4 varieties, it is still enough for you to do a bouquet bar. Now, it's probably gonna be hard if you only have like 2 varieties on hand, but I think if you cross the 4 variety mark, it becomes a lot easier for you to create a visual display as well as attract people, especially if those 4 varieties are very different in color. They might be different in style. So you got like a parrot, you got a double, you got a single, you got a fringe. Like those are all really unique and many customers haven't seen them, and that would also potentially draw people in. So first idea, tulip bouquet bar, and of course we're going to talk about pricing later. But second idea here, and again, this is if you're absolutely in a pinch and you have no other way to move stems, is utilizing Facebook Marketplace. This comes with a lot of asterisks, and I've done this too before. I've actually cleared over 50 bouquets within a single weekend. This happened because my farmer's market had gotten canceled and I happened to have quite a bit of flowers on hand, which for me at the time was like 25 bouquets in year 1. I actually really struggled to make a consistent amount of high volume bouquets in that first year. So I supplemented by buying flowers from a local flower friend who I now affectionately called Flower Friend Jess, or Grower Friend Jess. But the demand got so much that I actually had to buy more flowers from her in order to make bouquets. But before we get into the logistics of Facebook Marketplace and how to do it right, I want to say that you should make sure that if you have a cooler, you are maximizing that cooler. I don't have a walk-in cooler. I have a regular refrigerator. We actually have a couple of extra refrigerators, 3 to be exact. One of them is currently down. We're trying to figure out how to fix it. The other one is being used by our family because my in-laws are here to help with my daughter's treatment. And then the third one is being like kind of half used for flowers and half used for things like milk and things that aren't perishable and emit ethanol. So I say this because I don't have a lot of space either, but I don't think a lot of people realize how many tulips you can actually fit into a regular refrigerator if you're doing it right. Meaning you can dry store tulips without the bulbs and they can stay there for like at least 2 weeks. So I have a video up here in case if you are interested in learning more about that. I would be in favor of storing tulips for something like a bouquet bar versus going the route of Facebook Marketplace. And the reason for that is because people who are going on Facebook Marketplace are not going to pay you the price that you deserve from the time, the effort, and the specialty flowers that we are growing. If you think about it, like who goes on the Facebook Marketplace? People who are looking for a deal. The people who do well on Facebook Marketplace for flowers are people who are selling them for dirt cheap, for like $10 for a massive bunch. Now, that being said, I do think that with tulips and being in the spring, there could be a place for you and Facebook Marketplace if you had to move a lot of stems. So one of the mistakes that I see people who haven't used Facebook is that when they post an ad to Marketplace, they're only posting it to Marketplace. And this is actually not where you want your ad to be seen, because you have a chance to reach other people who are going to be more interested and willing to pay a little bit more by cross-posting to other groups. So I did another video here about my experience with selling on Facebook Marketplace. And here's a little snippet of exactly what I'm talking about regarding cross-posting.
I know many of you have posted on Facebook Marketplace and haven't gotten bites. So I talked earlier about needing to post in a very specific Facebook group. That is step number one. You want to make sure that you have somewhat of a more targeted audience. So we've moved enough in the last 6 years. We've actually moved 5 times in the last 6 years. And every single time you move, you obviously are trying to get rid of some stuff on Marketplace. So one of the things that I hate about Marketplace and why I was so reluctant to put my blooms on Marketplace is because you ultimately always get people who message you saying, is this still available? Then they never respond. Or if they respond, then they say, hey, like, well, you delivered in New York City, which is like an hour away, even though my description, I say no delivery. It's just, look, it doesn't matter your age, your race, your gender. On Facebook Marketplace, I always get flaky people and I always get people who are trying to negotiate. Heck, I feel like there was actually one time when I listed something for free and they basically demanded that I deliver it, right? That's just the type of people who I expect on Marketplace. But what I've noticed is that in these Facebook groups or these local group marketplace forums, it's not like that. The people are a lot less likely to negotiate and they're a lot more responsive and they're a lot more responsible in terms of following up on their quote unquote commitment to you in terms of pickup. So this is one of those experiences where I would say 9 out of 10 people who messaged me and I messaged back basically responded with either a yes or a no, which is an unbelievable response rate in my experience working with Facebook Marketplace. So the first tip is you have to post it in the right groups, right? And when you post on Facebook Marketplace, there's actually a prompt that Facebook has for you. It's like, would you like to post in these following groups? If you say yes, you have to join those groups as a member. So it does take time for you to get accepted into that group. But once you get accepted, it's pretty easy to cross post across multiple groups.
If this is something that you want more information on, I would highly recommend you watch that video that I referenced. It's a relatively lengthy video because I take you through this whole weekend and what happened. If you go to the later part of that video, there's more of like a summary and what to specifically do in order to cross post. But I would say that Facebook Marketplace as a whole may have a place in someone's business model. I wouldn't necessarily automatically rule it out. I just don't find that the people who I interact with are going to be what I call sticky customers. I have actually gotten some long-term customers from Marketplace. It's just the percentage of people who I've interacted with on Facebook Marketplace. The majority of them are one-time buyers looking for a deal, and we're talking maybe like 2 to 3% of people who are actually going to come back and buy from you on a consistent basis. So now we get to the most popular question around tulips, which is, how do I price tulips? I think the tulips are this really interesting crop because one, the cost of growing them is really high relative to other flowers. Remember, they're a bulb, so inherently they cost more money. They're a lot of labor in order to process for most people, and they don't perennialize like most other bulbs. So you've got a really high cost part of the equation. On the revenue side, many of us are actually limited by how much we can charge because consumers are just used to paying a certain amount of money for tulips at the grocery store. Even though many of those tulips are imported, harvested way too early, they're a little bit smaller because they're grown from smaller bulbs, and they never open up and color up in a way that local tulips can. So I say all of this because I do think that there is a band of prices that you can charge that is more narrow than many of the other types of specialty flowers that we grow. So with all of that in mind, one of the things that I really sought out to do last year was figure out, how do I get this cost portion of the tulip down? Now, the cost is broken up into 3 pieces. It's broken up into the cost of your bulb, the cost of the other inputs you need in order to grow that bulb, such as like compost or whatever it is, and water, utilities. And the third is your labor. Now, I would say that I don't really use compost, or like we have well water here. So number 2 is not really a big factor for me, but number 1 and number 3 are 3 things that I can control. So number 1, the cost of the bulb. I grow large quantities of it, therefore I buy it in wholesale crates. I'm buying single varieties that come in like anywhere from 400 to call it like 700 bulbs depending on the supplier. So obviously that means I'm growing one type of tulip for a massive amount, and so therefore I am getting wholesale prices. Now last year I would say on average the cost of my tulip bulb was anywhere from like 45 to 50 cents, including freight for that cost of the bulb. This upcoming year, so we're in 2025, we're already starting to order for 2026. Tulips have gone up by at least 20% everywhere. I'm seeing that the average cost per bulb is hovering in like the high 40s, if not 50-cent range. And then when you add freight on top of that, you are looking at close to at least a 10% difference in bulb cost. But all of that is honestly dwarfed by the amount that you are potentially spending on labor. So the challenge with tulips comes in two parts. One is the planting piece. When we first start out, we see a lot of people planting them really closely side by side in this like egg carton style, and it looks really neat, really pretty. It took me until last year to realize that that's not how the big boys do it when they're commercially farming. Like no one has the time to lay up all of these individual bulbs. Instead, they actually dump the bulbs into the ground. So that was the first major time saving piece for me, was knocking down the amount of time I spent planting. The only thing I do now is I make sure when I dump the bulbs into the ground, I am flattening the bulbs and creating a like one layer so that bulbs are not on top of each other. And then I'm putting soil on top. I'm doing this in a raised bed because my soil is heavy on clay. And that takes me to the next part, which is the harvesting piece of it. So I have this video over here, which basically takes no dig tulips to the next level. It allowed me to harvest in a way that was effortless because I didn't actually have to clean the tulips. There was very little dirt or soil on the stems and the leaves, and that is where a lot of the processing time happens, because when we're pulling the tulip out from the ground with the bulb, things are either muddy, we have to rinse off the dirt, and it's that rinsing off and processing that takes so much time. So again, I was able to eliminate a significant portion of that time, which really helped drive down my cost. So you need to know how much it costs for you to grow a crop before you can fully make a decision on how much do I need to charge in order to make a profit. So given all of this, I found that my calculations of labor added an extra 10 cents per bulb onto the cost. So I mentioned before that, on average, my bulbs cost about 50 cents to get to me with freight. So if I add 10 cents on top of that, now I'm looking at about 60 cents per tulip in order to procure that bulb, in order to spend the time and labor to grow it. It's actually not a very high number. If I had to guess, the majority of people are actually spending closer to $1 for a single tulip in order to get it from bulb to harvest because of the amount of labor that they're spending. And I'm using this number because of all of the labor time that I spent in year 2 doing it the way that most people are doing it. And it really made tulips a not profitable crop for me because I had spent so much time on labor. So if I use 60 cents as a benchmark, we're going to give a little bit of buffer and just call it like 65, 70 cents because, there's also, I want to put rubber bands. I want to use paper to wrap the tulip bulb. Sometimes I'm using jars, right? So give it a little bit of buffer. Let's just call it 70 cents. Now I have a baseline in terms of, okay, it cost me 70 cents to grow this tulip, what can I charge to make a profit? And I think that one of the things that newer growers, they think about profitability as this finish line that, hey, like my goal is to become profitable. And so how do I become profitable? But what they don't realize is that that line is actually a bit of a moving target depending on where you are in your business. So if you're a small business, you obviously don't have employees, you don't have a lot of overhead, that line's a lot closer. But even if you're in that situation, that line could be moved a little bit further out because you have higher expectations in terms of how much you want to make to be adequately compensated for that time. In other words, what is a good profit and what is a bad profit? Like, what are you willing to spend your time on to make it work for you? And so for me, like if I were to charge tulips, like let's just say a 10 bunch 10 stem bunch of tulips for $10, I'm only going to make $1. And even at my very low cost, like I'm making about 30 cents off of that one bulb. 30 cents times a bunch is $3. Like, that's not good enough for me. I'm not going to be spending all of this time to make a $3 profit off of a bunch. But now let's start thinking about, okay, like what do I feel is an adequate payment or profit for my time? And I would say that I would want at least like $1.50, if not $1.60 per stem. And ideally, if I can get up to like, $2, that would be awesome. So again, with all of the tulips that I've grown between winter and through the spring, from the winter tulip forcing that I do to the field tulips, I've noticed that the premium in which I can charge on the revenue side is also different, because in the winter, even though there are fewer events, retail customers really, really want flowers. And so therefore I can actually charge a higher per price stem on retail bouquets. So my typical setup for winter tulips is 8 stems for $20, and that comes out to $2.50 a stem. When it gets to the spring, when everyone has field tulips, I live in the Garden State, so it's relatively easy to grow here. Everyone has tulips, and we actually have a really big commercial grower who can grow locally. Those prices are not going to work. Like, it would be more reasonable for me to do something like a dozen tulips for $25 or 10 stems for $20. Even then, I have to be offering really specialty tulips, or I have to have cultivated a following that really understands the difference between specialty versus store-bought tulips. So I'm giving you this context because I want to make sure that you are pricing your tulips correctly, but still able to move them. So when we think about a pop-up or a Facebook marketplace type of deal, what are ways that you can structure so that you can move a lot of stems? Well, so let's just say that you want to offer a deal. 12 stems for $20. That comes out to about $1.67 per stem, which would be about $1 profit for me. So not terribly unreasonable. But it's not something I would pursue because like you've already dropped down the price and you're not moving a ton of stems. If you want to move a ton of stems, this is where you start layering deals. So the best types of deals are like buy 2, get 1 free. If you do buy 1, get 1 free, you're basically discounting by 50%, and it's really hard to make this work in flower math. So I find that if you do buy 2, get 1 free, there's a chance of it working. So if you do buy 2 bunches and each bunch actually now has 10 stems, you're ultimately charging 30 stems for, we'll call it $50, because each bunch will be $25. So 50 stems for $30 comes out also to about $1.67. But in this case, you've now moved a lot more stems than if you just did the 12 for $20, right? So you want to play around with the math and see what works for you. There are 2 things that I've learned in my short time of flower farming, which is 1, don't tell the customer how many stems are in a bunch unless if they ask. But 2, customers don't count stems. So they're not necessarily looking at a bunch and being like, oh, there's 10 stems and not 12 stems in here. They're actually more just looking at perceived value. Like if you have really big tulip heads, you can definitely get away with putting fewer in there. If you have really small tulip heads, then that's going to be a different story. So again, every situation is really unique, and you can't necessarily have like a manual here that's going to dictate what that pricing looks like. You have to make your own judgment on that decision making. To me, it is better to make overall a little bit less profit, but more money, meaning I'd rather move all of my stems than move a few stems but have a higher profitability percentage. Because at the end of the day, what matters is how much money is going into your pocket in totality, not the percentage of profitability, especially with a crop like tulips where they can blow open really easily, especially if you don't have a cooler. Now, I want to emphasize that when we're trying to build a sustainable business, we're not looking for quick solutions on how to move stems. The best way to sell flowers for what they are worth is to make sure that you are doing your marketing consistently and ahead of time. One question I get very frequently from newer growers who are just starting their season is, I haven't grown any flowers yet. Should I still make my Facebook page? How do I start marketing? And the answer is yes, you absolutely want to start your Facebook page and you want to start marketing. And marketing isn't just about selling. So meaning it isn't just about having a product and telling people that that product is available, because that's called selling. Marketing is creating a story and a brand, right? Meaning that you are taking people along your journey. You are helping people understand what makes your flowers special, why, like what makes them want to buy your flowers versus someone else's. And you don't necessarily need to have a product in hand to do that. Last year, I actually did something called the 30-day Facebook challenge to double your Facebook following. I actually have a PDF of all of the emails that I had during that challenge, and it is also up on my Patreon for those who are interested. Again, it's $5 a month for those who are interested in joining for access to everything. It didn't come out to be the full 30 days because my daughter was diagnosed during that time, but I got a lot of feedback from people who even followed the posts for a full week, and they had actually started seeing results. So it goes to show you that anyone can start creating a Facebook following, especially if you know how to do it smartly and you're doing it consistently. So with all of that said, if you are employing any of the things I'm talking about here, I would love to hear how it goes in the comments. There are a few other tulip related videos that I will link in the description below, especially if you want to know how to store tulips, or you want to know just like tulip economics and all that stuff. I have other videos related to that, so I'll post that in the description. But in the meantime, here is a quick update on E. Pink, yes. What other colors do you see? That is blue. Good job. Do you see any other colors? Purple is right. Good job.
One, two, three. Ready?
Squat. Oh, now squeezing in there. Oh, wow. Is that bubble?
Look at the bubbles.
Look, I have magical flower lights. Do you have flower power? Can you show me your flower power? Flower power.